Kamala Harris doubles down on gun control with her VP pick. Plus, Donald Trump publicly supports gun rights on the campaign trail. All this and more on the news update.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the news update. I'm contributing writer Jake Fogleman, joined as always by Reload founder Stephen Gutowski, founder of thereload.com, of course, where you can head on over today and sign up for our free newsletter. I also want to mention that this episode is brought to you by The Dispatch, but more on that at the end of the episode. Diving into some of the big news of the week, obviously one of the biggest stories is that Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris has officially tapped her VP. It's Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. He sort of came down to the wire there between Walz and Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, and she decided to go the Walz route. And I think it's notable for a couple of reasons, but one especially about gun policy in particular. Just based on Walz's sort of identity and his past track record and his current stance on the issue sort of says, I think, something about the stance that this ticket is in particular is trying to hit on when it comes to gun policy. Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly it was not an effort to move to the center, which you sometimes see or with these VP picks, although not always. I mean, Trump's VP pick was not a move to the center either. On guns or otherwise. And it's the same thing here with Walz. He's not a move to the center on gun policy or otherwise for Kamala Harris. In fact, basically, he supports all of the policies that she currently is advocating for. We obviously had, as we discussed last week, her campaign walk back some of her support for a mandatory buyback of so-called assault weapons, right? AR-15s and similar firearms. So Walz has never gone that far, but he does support a ban on the sale. And that's the current position that Harris has. And it's also been the position of the Biden campaign up until he dropped out. So, they basically solidified their position on guns with this pick of Walz. That Shapiro. Not that you wrote a good piece looking at some of these candidates, and it kind of also gives you a hint about how much wider the search for VPs was than a lot of people had speculated at the beginning of this, right? Because when we wrote up our look ahead at where the potential VPs were at on guns. Walz wasn't one of the top candidates at that point, right?
Yeah, not at the time.
But he was basically in line with three of the four that you wrote about, where the Democratic Party at this point, there's just not much variation on gun policy. They're all supportive of essentially three big policies, which these are the three that the Harris campaign is running on, and it's what the Biden campaign had been running on as well. But universal background checks, red flag laws, and an assault weapons ban on sales. They're obviously in 2020, the party primary went much further than that to mandatory buybacks, to Beto O'Rourke saying, hell yeah, we're going to come and take your guns. They're not at that point in this race, but they are all still solidified around these three policies. And so Walz coming in and getting the pick doesn't really change anything on that. For the only one that we profiled that might have actually been a legitimate walk towards the center on guns was Andy Beshear, who's the governor of
Kentucky.
Yeah, there you go. Which gives you some insight into why he's maybe a little bit different on gun policy. Although even he's not really he doesn't get A ratings, I don't think, from the NRA. He more doesn't actively push for new gun restrictions, right, like most of the rest of the party. That's kind of his big distinction.
And he doesn't veto gun bills that get sent to him from his state legislature. He doesn't sign them either, but he doesn't veto them.
Right. So that's kind of your most prominent moderate Democrat on gun, just as far as there isn't a lot of variation within the party. That's the bottom line. And this pick cements the fact that the Democratic ticket is not going to be tracking any further to the center than it has to this point.
Right. And I think Walz himself is sort of emblematic of that, right? Because in his past as a congressman, he was actually was A-rated by the NRA and was considered a pro-gun Democrat. He was endorsed several times while he was in Congress from 2006 to 2016. And then when he ran for governor, the Parkland shooting happened. And this is kind of when you saw the broader shift among the party, but it also happened in Walz's political career. Is he suddenly pivoted. He publicly distanced himself from the NRA. He apparently donated his past contributions from the group to charity, or so he claimed. And then he came out and supported an assault weapon ban for the first time. And then he governed as a gun control governor. He signed universal background checks and red flag laws in Minnesota. Yeah. And so he sort of is emblematic of this. Like you said, the Democratic Party is pretty unified on at least 3 policies. Some support more, obviously, but they've all sort of coalesced around gun control. The days of the blue dog pro-gun Democrat are, few and far between.
Yeah, basically over at this point. I will say there's been a Democrat that received the endorsement of the NRA this year for the first time in, I think, like 4 years, right?
Yes.
It's a Democrat up in Alaska. And even there, they had to put up with at least some pro-gun control sentiment from that candidate when making that endorsement, right?
Yeah, in the past, I believe she flirted with some gun control. So Mary Peltola is the one representative from the state of Alaska, and she's the incumbent. And so I guess in her past, she had voiced some support for gun control measures. Although as a candidate in her 2 years, she has not voted for gun control when they've been presented in the chamber. And she voted in favor of like a pro public lands shooting bill. And she has a mentions on her website that she wants to defend the Second Amendment, and she's pro Second Amendment. And she says it's important for Alaskans, and it's mostly hunting related, but it's sort of emblematic still. It's not your typical, it's not your Thomas Massey posing with a, AR-15 on a couch
Christmas,
kind of. Yeah.
It's Christmas card. Yeah.
A little bit different.
Yeah. Right. And so, and that's the only Democrat that the NRA is, and that maybe even says more about where the NRA is at today than the Democratic Party moving closer to them. Like they may, because part of that, obviously, the NRA, it's sort of a push-pull thing with Democrats, where the party has shifted, but also the NRA has shifted toward closer to Republicans and been less willing to work with Democrats and endorse them. At the same time that Democrats were becoming less willing as a party overall to work with the NRA. So maybe the NRA is trying to make some inroads with this pick. I don't know. We'll have to see if that translates into anything beyond this one race. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see that how solidified the entire Democratic Party has become on this particular issue. And even like we mentioned, Bashir, even the sort of moderate-ish ones, they're not your like hardcore gun rights advocates that you used to see in Democrat. Like there was always a lot of consensus in the party around. I mean, especially universal background checks and assault weapons ban. That's been Democratic dogma for 30 plus years now. And it was always the consensus position of the Democratic Party generally. But at this point, it's really become the only position that you don't really see outside of maybe a couple of state, maybe state level races that not even congressional races, but state level races. You might see some variation, but for the most part, the party has really solidified lately on these issues. So, and I think Walz is emblematic of that, like you said, and this pick is also emblematic. It really solidifies all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. But speaking of gun politics at the top of the ticket, we have another story about, on the other side, former President Donald Trump just gave a press conference this week. And for, I think, one of the first times in sort of a mass media approach, for the first times, he broached the subject of the Second Amendment and made an appeal to gun rights. And you wrote about it, what he said and why it was noteworthy.
Yeah, well, it's really noteworthy because in contrast to the Harris campaign, which is mentioned, while they did have that sort of walk back of mandatory gun buyback or mandatory assault weapons buyback, she has consistently talked about the other 3 policies: the ban on sales of assault weapons, the universal background checks, red flag laws, in every speech that she gives. Now she does the traditional thing of giving a stump speech. So it's the very similar speech most of the time when she's speaking, but she's made it a priority to have this as something that she talks about consistently. And even in the announcement of Walz, they also talked about this. Whereas Donald Trump and the Republican Party have taken the other strategy, which is kind of to just stop talking about guns. We've covered this extensively here. The party platform had all of its specific gun policy promises stripped from it. Donald Trump, the RNC didn't feature a gun rights speaker as it had the last time they had a convention, where they had someone from the NRA spoke as part of the lineup. They didn't have that this time around. And then Trump himself didn't mention gun policy at all in his record-long acceptance speech. And so it seemed to be sending the message that this is not something that they want to prioritize, that they want to emphasize to people, that they want to have as part of their talking points. Now that they hadn't necessarily changed positions, they took out the promises, but they didn't say we're going to have a different position on this issue. But their strategies seem to be silenced. And the only times that Trump has really talked about guns since the NRA annual meeting in May, and even at the NRA annual meeting in May, one of his big takeaways is that he doesn't think gun owners vote. And so just having him come out on Thursday at his press conference and talk, actually in two different sections about guns and contrast his positions with Harris's is interesting, right? That could signal a change, a shift in policy. I mean, that whole press conference felt like it was, Trump trying to go out unhappy with how his campaign has responded to this switch from the Democratic Party and try to kind of reset things himself. And it is certainly possible after watching it that he wants guns to be a more prominent issue because perhaps he doesn't actually believe that gun owners don't vote and maybe just thinks that he can excite more support from the gun voting bloc with an actual emphasis on the issue. Now it's by no means completely clear. And I talked about this in an analysis piece for members on the Reload, but first off, he was prompted to talk about guns by a question where he did say basically his views on AR-15s haven't changed, even though someone tried to kill him with one, right? He got shot with an AR-15 and he was asked if that changed his view and he said no. And then he went into basically attacking Kamala Harris. He said she wants to take everyone's guns, which is not quite accurate, right? It's Trump. He exaggerates on a number of these points. He said he completely protected gun rights while president. Neither one of those things is completely true, of course. Kamala Harris did want to take people's guns, but she wanted to take the assault weapons and a mandatory buyback. Not every gun. People can make up their minds about whether she would go beyond what she said, but that's what she's said. Anyway, and then, of course, he instituted things like bump stock ban. There have been critiques. We've talked about his weaknesses on gun policy before. But the key point here is he's discussing this issue. And then he brought it up again unprompted later in the press conference. And he didn't make any specific policy promises, but he did talk about guns, and he did talk about the importance of gun rights and protecting the Second Amendment, and contrasted that with Harris. And that's really the first time he's done that. So it could signal that he's changing, but it also could be kind of, fleeting thoughts in a very long stream of consciousness event, which is something he does all the time, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
I think it's It's too soon to tell for sure, but it is, like you said, it's the first sign that we've had so far in this campaign, as we've been all over the fact that it really has been mum's the word when it comes to gun policy and gun rights. And so he was, when he was asked, he was willing to give a defense of gun rights and say that, I'm not going to ban AR-15s. And we'll see if that's something that he plans to stick with going forward, especially as the polls continue to shift as they have over the last couple of weeks.
Right. Because it seems like the strategy has been in front of gun audiences, because, for instance, Chris LaCivita, one of his campaign managers, at the RNC at an off-site event hosted by the United States Concealed Carry Association, he did promise to those attendees that Trump would appoint more pro-gun judges like he did his first term if he's elected. But Trump didn't say that in his speech, notably, even though, as we mentioned, it went on for a very long time and he was well off the prompter most of the time. So it seemed like the strategy was going to be, or has been, for them to emphasize their pro-gun positions in front of pro-gun audiences and keep quiet on the issue in front of more mainstream audiences, perhaps. Like that seemed to be what they were trying to do. And we had Cam Edwards on the interview podcast not long ago, and he reacted to this by saying, it's possible that the reason they're doing that is to try and build a broader coalition and have more of a landslide type election. That seemed to be what they were shooting for earlier in this campaign. Now that the polls have tightened, it's possible that they might be switching back to a base turnout strategy. Yeah, that's what Cam predicted could happen, and maybe that's what this is. But yeah, again, we'll have to see, because it's just one press conference. And yeah, if you've watched any Trump speech over the last 10 years, you know that not everything he says is necessarily part of some master plan or strategy shift. He can just say stuff sometimes. So we'll have to watch for a pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another big story, speaking of sort of AR-15s, as we've been hitting on a couple times here, is we have a massive ruling out of the Fourth Circuit, the en banc Fourth Circuit. So the entire court has finally delivered a ruling in the Bianchi case, which was dealing with Maryland's so-called assault weapon ban. Listeners may recall that this is one that already worked its way through the Fourth Circuit, was at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did what's called a grant, vacate, and remand after the Bruin decision in 2022, and sent it back down to the Fourth Circuit. And it's been 2 years, and we finally have it all the way back through the Fourth Circuit. And as many people expected, the en banc Fourth Circuit Court upheld the ban as constitutional.
Yes, and there were some shenanigans along the way that we talked to Mark Smith about this a while back on some of the odd procedural goings on in this case that which the dissent appeared to confirm, that there were some legal maneuvering that kind of kept the 3-judge panel below this en banc panel from issuing its opinion that would have overturned the ban. And they did that to try and keep that from becoming the precedent going into this case, and it seems like it worked. But ultimately, the bigger picture here is that the Fourth Circuit has now upheld Maryland's assault weapons ban, and that puts it in line potentially for Supreme Court review. I don't think there's anything terribly remarkable about the ruling itself. It does have this sort of twist on it that was in the last. They kept in line with their reasoning before Bruin, which was this argument that AR-15s and the other banned guns are too similar to military weapons and therefore can be banned. That's sort of a bit of a unique twist on these sorts of rulings that uphold hardware bans, but they do basically fall back on the one that you've written about a number of times and explained it, which is like essentially because mass shootings are a modern problem that's derived from these advancements in firearms technology, like semi-automatic mechanisms and ammunition magazines, that they can reason from a more broad analytical view, and therefore these courts tend to determine that almost any regulation of any weapon at all can be used as an analogous an analogous restriction that upholds the modern assault weapons ban under the Bruin standard. And that's essentially what they did here. They pointed to Bowie knives, gunpowder, storage restrictions, things of that nature. Typical ruling that you see oftentimes in these cases on that front. So the bigger picture thing is that this case is now done. Like, it's at the merits. They ruled on the merits. This wasn't a preliminary injunction, a temporary restraining order. It wasn't any of that. It was the final ruling on the merits in this case. And that sets up the Supreme Court to take this case, if they are going to take an assault weapons ban case.
Right.
Now, there still isn't a circuit split here. So that remains an issue for gun rights litigants. But there is good reason to think the Supreme Court might take this, right? Yeah,
I was going to say, this will be a good test to see what the Supreme Court's true appetite is to take a hardware ban case. I know a lot of Reload members have asked this question before. Do we think there's enough judges that want to take a case? And I think this one will be the test for that because, like you said, it is at final judgment. It's an en banc final judgment. So there's not even a chance to appeal a panel decision up to the en banc. It's literally, there's nowhere else for it to go. Mm-hmm. Its reasoning was very similar to the sort of being AR-15s being essentially military weapons. Is very similar to what the Seventh Circuit did, which, if listeners will recall, Justice Thomas specifically addressed because the gun rights plaintiffs in that case wanted the Supreme Court to hear that, and it was at an interlocutory posture. But Justice Thomas said, we're not going to take it because it is at an interlocutory posture. However, and then he essentially went a multi-paragraph length about why he thought the decision was flawed, and the court needs to address this sooner rather than later. Justice Samuel Alito also signed on separately, not to that opinion, but just to say that he would have granted to take that case. So we know at least two justices wanted to hear. And then Thomas said, this is something the court ought to hear when there is a case at final judgment. And we have a case at final judgment. And on the circuit split point, I would agree that, some judges or justices rather might say, we usually like to take cases when there's a controversy among the lower circuits. But on an assault weapon ban, as we've talked about before, I don't think you're going to get a circuit split. No. Just geographically where these bans take place, it's going to be your Ninth Circuit, your Second Circuit, your Fourth Circuit courts that have shown a willingness to uphold these bans. And you're not likely to get a circuit split.
At the very least, you're not going to get a circuit split at the en banc level. There is a sort of circuit split going on right now, in the sense that there was a New Jersey judge. There have been judges in other circuits that have struck down assault weapons
fair point
under Bruin. In Colorado, we saw that at in a couple of cases at the local level, but it was still federal courts, and that's a different circuit than the Fourth Circuit. We saw that in just recently in New Jersey. There was a federal judge who struck down the New Jersey's ban on specifically AR-15s. You read a good piece about that kind of very odd ruling, but it's still a split from where the Fourth Circuit is at. But you're right in the sense that we are very unlikely to get en banc panels from different circuits ruling differently on assault weapons bans because they're all in more liberal circuits, right? That's we've talked about this in the past, but that's the hurdle for challenging a lot of gun control laws, a lot of the stricter ones, because they're just not in many states, and the states that they're in are governed by federal circuits that are very left-leaning on these issues and almost never strike down gun laws. And so they rarely end up disagreeing with one another. And so that's where you might run into problems as a gun rights litigant. If the court doesn't want to take up an assault weapons ban case, it has an excuse not to. That doesn't involve having to rule on the merits, right? They can just say, this isn't right because there isn't a circuit split. We're just going to respect. Now, the practical question is whether 4 justices disagree with that point. And, I don't know. You certainly, like you said, there's clearly Alito and Thomas will vote to take this case. I think that's obvious. Kavanaugh ruled in Heller 2 when he was on the DC circuit he basically created the history and tradition test in that case where he was the dissenting judge and he would have struck down DC's assault weapons ban. So maybe that's a pretty strong indicator that he would probably vote to take it up. And then so the rest you have are, Roberts, Kavanaugh, Barrett, and I don't know. We don't know what they would do necessarily. Right. I don't think any of them have heard an assault weapons ban case. I don't know that any of them have written. Gorsuch joined Thomas on one of the concealed carry cases out of California when they denied that a few years back, right? Joined the Thomas's dissent from that decision to reject that particular case. And that had a lot of very strong language on Second Amendment not being a second-class right. And I don't know. I mean, certainly you have a lot of these justices saying we need to do more gun cases. You even have Jackson. I don't know if she's saying that, but she's saying at least we haven't decided a bunch of key questions for the Bruin test. Barrett has that opinion too. Kavanaugh. So like, if you read Rahimi and the concurrences in there, and you get a lot of room for the idea that they should take up more Second Amendment cases. But we also have seen them not do that when they have the opportunity. They just GBR'd a bunch of cases they didn't have.
I was going to say, this sort of leads us into one of the newsletter links we want to hit on, because they could have their plates full on cases that they really ought to take up because we have news. I linked in the newsletter, the 8th Circuit has already returned a verdict on the felon in possession ban that was just sent down after Rahimi. So what was that, like a little over a month and a half ago?
Right.
The government filed a brief after Rahimi saying, hey, please don't GVR these. You didn't clarify anything for us. They GVR'd it anyway. And now we have one of those rulings. Ruled the exact same way. Yeah, the exact same way as before. And so that clearly is also another segment of Second Amendment law that is pretty much crying out for Supreme Court review. So they may just have their hands full with a lot of gun cases. And that could be maybe something that is a counterweight.
And that's the interesting thing, because if you look at gun control from a practical level in the United States, the vast majority of actual gun charges are like for your felon in possession charges.
Yeah.
So
overwhelmingly,
if you're thinking from a like law enforcement perspective on these cases, now, obviously gun rights advocates are much more concerned with these hardware ban cases because they're very vocally opposed to these restrictions. But, people aren't getting prosecuted under those laws at anywhere near the same rate as, the felon in possession federal law. And so, from a law enforcement perspective and from perhaps a judge's perspective, and certainly from the government's perspective, these felon in possession cases, which are still broadly undecided, what they decided in Rahimi was very narrow in terms of the actual holding. And it probably doesn't affect that many real world cases. But there's still a lot of lingering questions about, nonviolent felons, for instance. Where is the line between violent and nonviolent felons? How do these laws interact with Bruin? And it's interesting because that would seem to be a higher priority, perhaps for the court, or certainly for the government, as they've made clear. And the court tends to take the government's position very seriously on this kind of stuff. And I don't know. So it's a bit odd to see them GVR all those cases. They didn't have to. They could have taken some and at least given a clear position on what's going on here. And instead, they didn't do that. And so I don't know. That's your bullish look at why they might not take an assault weapons ban case, because they got all these other cases that maybe you could even argue from their point of view should be more urgent. That's just from a law enforcement government point of view, not necessarily from a rights point of view, right? Certainly infringement of rights is always urgent, but I'm just talking about the practicality of how the courts might handle these different things, because everything they address is a rights issue in one way or another. And they might be more inclined to start taking the cases that have a broadest effect. And that would be these felon in possession cases, because that's the most common actual charge that people are hit with, and it'll affect way more people in the current system than any of these assault weapons ban cases. But I don't know. We'll see. I would imagine there should be 4 votes to take an assault weapons ban case at the merits phase, which is what this Fourth Circuit case is at now. And then maybe they'll do, but same for the Eighth Circuit case. That seems like a merits state or range, right? The one that would probably clarify a lot more things. Whether Range, the guy who lied to get food stamps, whether he should be barred for life from owning guns. That seems like another obvious one they should take, but they haven't.
Yeah. I'll say it'll be fascinating to see what they do with these cases. And obviously we'll stay on top of it once we get some more clarity on that point. One of the other newsletter links we want to hit is we have a new development in the ongoing saga between Mexico and a lot of America's top gun makers. We reported before that that case was originally dismissed under the PLCAA at the district court level. The First Circuit came back and overturned that decision and said that lawsuit can proceed. And it's gone back to the district court level, and that same district judge has dismissed a large chunk of the suit now on jurisdictional grounds because they're suing in Massachusetts court. And only Smith & Wesson, and there's a local distributor in Massachusetts, they're the only ones actually located in Massachusetts. And the judge essentially said you can't sue, every major gun manufacturer an alleged injury to Mexico originating in Massachusetts if these folks aren't even coming from Massachusetts. And so now you have a huge section of Mexico's claims, once again, dismissed at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't look good for their case. They're using that sort of Sandy Hook strategy of trying to undermine the PLCAA protections that Smith & Wesson has by arguing, essentially that their advertising violates the state law, and therefore, because there's an underlying criminal violation or violation of law, that PLCAA doesn't apply. We'll see if that goes anywhere once they get to that section of the case. But it's obviously not a good sign for Mexico that most of their case was tossed. But it also these are Hail Mary type lawsuits. Even the Sandy Hook one was only a success because they managed to settle. They never made it to the merits on that case either, which probably would have been hard to prove. But, again, these are, generally speaking, with these particular lawsuits, the point is not to get to the merits. The point is to drag out the legal battle and make the defendants have to pay a bunch of money to go through the whole process of this sort of lawfare, basically. Or hand over discovery that can be used to,
publicize some unsavory detail of some sort or another.
Of course, that was also supposed to be one of the points of Sandy Hook suit, and they got a bunch of discovery and nothing ever came out of that from what I remember. But the point of these lawsuits isn't necessarily to actually win in the end. It's which is why the PLCAA was passed in the first place, because these were sort of borderline frivolous suits that were designed more to be a nuisance to the companies that they're going after than to actually win on merits in court. So that's why Congress passed this law in the first place. But there are a number of exceptions, and 20 years later, some of those exceptions have they've been able to get around some of the protections offered by the law, and that's where this. And
on that point, kind of related to the last topic we just talked about, so that the First Circuit's decision is currently still awaiting Supreme Court potentially intervening. Both the gun industry appealed that decision, which was essentially on the PLCAA grounds, wants the Supreme Court to step in and overturn the First Circuit's decision there. So we could end up seeing, the Supreme Court is inclined to intervene, because that also is an interlocutory posture, but it's a novel sort of question of law with the PLCAA. So there's all sorts of moving parts.
Didn't intervene. One of the reasons that Sandy Hook case went to a settlement is because the Supreme Court declined to intervene. Back when that was brought to them at this sort of stage in the trial, because the Massachusetts Supreme Court had ruled that there was enough for the case to move forward, even the Massachusetts Supreme Court said it was be a hard case to win. but they had enough of a claim to move forward. Remington, in that case, tried to get the Supreme Court of the United States to intervene, and they refused to. So that kind of sealed the deal to a certain degree on that case. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the Supreme Court will act differently this time, but there is a history of them not intervening here.
Yeah, it's a good point. And as we're coming up on time here, one last thing we wanted to hit on is I think you have some news to break about some events this weekend. Yeah,
the NRA, right? So they're in this negotiation phase for these remedies that the judge wants to see instituted. And he basically said, hey, NRA and New York AG, go and discuss these reforms that I have suggested here, see if you can agree on terms, and then come back to me with, briefs from each of your point of view. And so the NRA is actually, according to my sources, is having a meeting of the Legal Affairs Committee at their headquarters this weekend on Saturday. So I don't believe it's open to members. So I don't think regular NRA members can attend it, but it is something where they apparently, according to the email that I saw a copy of, they invited board members to attend, but they have to pay their own way. Essentially, like, they can come, but they'd have to put up for their own lodging. And this is actually interesting because it's something the judge, this kind of stuff seems to be something he doesn't want them to do anymore. He's suggested that they basically create systems for board members to have direct access and immediate access to meetings and documents virtually, because it doesn't appear to be any way for board members to attend this virtually. They'd have to go in person, which has been a big complaint of a lot of the reformers on the NRA for years now, that this is sort of one way that some members of leadership have controlled the information that gets to the board. But so anyway, it'll be interesting to see what comes of this board meeting or this committee meeting, if anything. But I also just found it fascinating to see them still doing this kind of stuff in the middle of the judge considering basically ordering them not to do these kinds of things. But maybe this is different enough from what he's talking about for there to be a distinction that I'm not seeing. But yeah, either way, there'll be a Legal Affairs Committee meeting of the NRA at the headquarters on Saturday. And I don't know if I hear anything from it. If anything develops out of it, we'll of course let you know.
I'll say we'll have to stay on top of that and await your report.
Maybe
whatever happens.
Maybe I'll hit up the range this weekend. see what's going on there, or the museum. The NRA has a lovely firearms museum. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting to see, and maybe it could mean that they're close to settling these last couple of reforms that the judge wants. I don't know. We'll have to see.
But I think that just about does it for us.
Do you have anything going on this weekend? Anything fun?
This weekend, I'm heading up to the mountains with my fiance. Nothing really planned, but just a little weekend getaway. So looking forward to that.
I'm probably going to watch the Olympics. I've loved the Olympics so far. America is so great, to be honest.
Agreed.
With you. It's so awesome. Do you watch that?
I'm never more patriotic than when the Olympics rolls around.
How can you not be watching that stuff? It's incredible. Yeah. Love our athletes.
I watch the medal count every time we tick up in leading in the gold. I'm like, let's go.
And everyone all the other countries try to rationalize the count.
Yeah.
You got to count it this way. And it's like, nope, now we're leading in everything, folks. I'm sorry.
Keep coping.
Be better. I don't know. What do you want?
Yeah.
If you want the medal count to look favorable to your country, try winning more medals. I don't know.
Be better at events.
Just good luck. I don't know. We've got the best athletes in the world. I don't know what to tell you. That's I will say Serbia, very impressed by their basketball team. Yeah. That game was amazing. It was so stressful, incredible comeback to win it. Love Joel Embiid, my Sixer. MVP.
Special shout out to Jokic, even though I'm American Patriot. Jokic good. Is a Denver Nugget. And
we should force him to become an American citizen so we can
agree. We should claim him, annex him.
He almost beat us. I mean, the Serbs, I knew they were going to be good going into. I mean, obviously they're the best player in the world, and they seem to really love basketball over there. That's kind of crazy. I've seen some of their basketball games, and the crowds are nuts. But still, we're still America here. I'm still
That's right.
Very proud to watch. I've also been staying up super late to watch the freaking West Coast Phillies games. That I don't get this. The MLB, you've got the Phillies playing the Dodgers, two of the best teams in the league, and you start the games at 10 p.m. after 10 p.m. Eastern. Like, I understand it's the West Coast. There's 3 hours, but my God, I've had to be up till 1 a.m. watching these games. Now, luckily, they won 2-3 against the Dodgers, and they won last night against Arizona. They're in Arizona. I don't know. I know Arizona has their own time zone. They're very special people. Mike Williver from ASPA podcast, which, by the way, if you guys don't listen to that one, you'll probably enjoy it. We do a news podcast over there as well. You should check him out. But yeah, he lives in Arizona, and I love Arizona. But yeah, I don't know if they're on Pacific time now. I know they live in their own special time land, but 9:40 for a game, come on. I'm getting old. I can't be up every night watching these games. But I don't know. At least the Phillies are winning again. It has been worth it for that, I will say.
Yeah, East Coast time zone problems. Mountain time zone is superior right now. We're never too late, never too early. Always perfect to watch events.
Right in the middle. That's true. That is nice. It must be nice because I got to be up till 1 to watch a freaking regular season baseball game. But anyway, at least I got to see Schwarber hit 3 runs, I think, in the last Dodgers game. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, that's all we've got for this week. I'm going to head over to our Dispatch ad now, give you some insight into why I like that publication, why I think you should check them out. Okay, it is time once again to talk about the Dispatch. We're doing a promo swap. We've been doing it for a little while now, and it's a pretty easy thing for me to get behind because I've been a paying subscriber at the Dispatch really since it launched. And I think it's one of the best publications out there, especially in your center right media, your conservative media, in large part because they focus, like we do here at the Reload, on hard news reporting first. That's what they were founded to do. That's where they put a lot of their energies. I read the Morning Dispatch every single day to keep up to date with what's going on in the country, in politics, and in news from a national perspective. And I would highly recommend it to anybody who's listening. There's a free trial if you follow the link in our bio here or down below in the description over at the Reload's website or in the newsletter. You'll find the link to that free trial, so you can not just take my word for it, but go and try out a subscription over there. You'll get access to all kinds of great original hard news reporting. That's their sort of bread and butter, I would say, especially stuff that it's great to read the Morning Dispatch because it gives you a little bit of a different approach, a little bit of a different take on these stories that they're finding and that they're reporting, and they're gathering information and bringing it to you. And it just has a different editorial take as well. It's more for the politically homeless, for people like, I think there was 53% in the most recent Pew poll that wanted a different option than what they have in the current presidential election. So if you feel that way, I think you probably find yourself right at home over at the Dispatch. Of course, they have a big name and analysts and opinion writers there as well who come from a center right perspective, people you've heard of before, I'm sure. Jonah Goldberg, Steve Hayes, Kevin Williamson, I'll pun if you've been deeply immersed in online media for the last 15 years like I have, one of the best writers out there. And it continues on down the line. They've got a really great lineup of writers over there. Chris Steyerwalt's another really good one. It's just a fantastic publication. And this is actually getting long. I don't think I'm supposed to go on for this long, but it's easy to do that when I'm talking about this, because I have a lot of respect for what they've done. Another independent publication, startup. They've really had a great success, and I think they're the model for our industry, and also a place where you're going to find value if you go over and check them out. So, click the link, get your free trial, try them out for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. But yeah, the Dispatch, head over and check them out.